all for being here and for supporting this project. I know all of you have been to Angel Island and actually been to the monument, and so you have personal stories, and hopefully some of these stories that you will, the oral histories, you will find friends that you have known represented, or maybe they reflect experiences that your own parents, grandparents have, and ancestors have undergone. I want to thank several people. Judy has thanked San Francisco Study Center, and I wanted to thank Mark Takahashi for photographing the first V on the island, for photographing all those carved and written poems, which was how we came to find them out. And George Araki, who was a biology teacher at San Francisco State University at the time, who called it to Mark's attention, and of course Alexander Weiss, the park ranger, who brought it to everybody's attention. And so these are flukes in history, and I think they're meant to be. I mean, that building was earmarked for being demolished, and somehow it took one person to recognize the significance of what those poems represented and brought it to the right people's attention. Ellen is going to be reading the Chinese selections. We have 7 short poems we're going to read in Chinese, and then I will read the English. But I want to background the poems with several insights that I've had and others have shared about the Angel Island poems. Most important, and that's my grandson who said he's going to be on the microphone talking next. The most important thing that I didn't know at the time, him, Mark, and I were going back and forth translating the poems, was what the significance of these poems are, because you're just caught up in the work of translation and trying to be as true as you can, and everybody knows that 2 languages are like 2 leaves, they're never the same. And you do the best you can, because there are no Chinese equivalent words for a lot of the words and terms in Chinese. There are just no English words. So you have to find the closest equivalent to that. And so hopefully we did justice to that, and thanks to him, Mark Lai's just scrupulous and attention to detail, historical history, and we went back and forth, a lot of them, and as it turned out, after going over and removing some of the paint from different periods when Angel Island was in use, we were able to uncover the original writings, and in, the administration had put putty over a lot of the calligraphy and could cover it up, and what that ended up doing was preserving the original calligraphy so that they could be seen more clearly after the paint levels were removed. But the important thing about these poems are that they represent the first Chinese American, Asian American literature in the US shores. It's the body of work that represents China as the bridge to a new cultural identity, that of a Chinese American. So we could look at the Angel Island poems as our first Asian American literature. There had been up till then, of course, individual writings, poems, etc., but not a body of work that was written at a specific historical time in our history of Chinese exclusion, which represented the themes of wanting to be an American. So these poems represent a whole new content that was different from Chinese literature. It represented the sensibility of wanting to become accepted. So it's immigrant literature in the truest sense, and it's pioneer literature in the truest sense. And what secondly most important is that these poems were written by young boys who had barely, any formal education, elementary school, possibly middle school education, but they were from farmer backgrounds, working class. These are not scholars that had studied for the exams in Beijing. These were poor working class peasants. And when when you listen to the poems that Ella and I will be reading, try to see, imagine that this is the voice of a 14-year-old, 16-year-old, 20-year-old young man. I mean, when him, Mark, and I are translating the poems, actually the voice I heard was that of a mature, older person. Because when you read the poems, the sensibility and the awareness is that of a much more mature person, someone who had really struggled in life. So that's really quite remarkable. And they were writing in traditional classical forms that, if you were reading the Chinese, will be recognizable to you. But they're basically the standard, 4 to 6 line forms. And the third insight I had about the poems was that many of them, of course not all of them, but there's a remarkable theme of resistance, revolution, and self-determination. So you can look at these prison poems, if you will, prison poems of resistance, drawing on models in Chinese history, historical figures that you'll find in the footnotes, like King Wen, who was attributed for organizing the 64 trigrams in the I Ching and writing the judgments for those hexagrams. He was held up as the paragon of virtue. So this is what they were all aspiring to become, like King Wen, who had been basically imprisoned and wasn't able to come to, it was his son who was later on overthrew the Shang dynasty. So this was a paragon of virtue. And then you have, figures like him and Su Wu, who was, he was captured by foreigners and imprisoned for 19 years. And he managed to become free after that. And he never lost his loyalty to the Chinese, and he ended up fighting the Mongol invaders. So that's another, and the third thing about the poems is that they're interactive. They're a communal work, a collective work. None of them were signed by name. Of course, there could be reprisals from the government. You weren't supposed to be vandalizing, writing on the walls. And so they're signed anonymously. But they were written. Why were they written? That's a basic fundamental question. Why did they bother to write these poems down? And that was because they were consciously attempting to create a synergy of solidarity, kinship, and support for the detainees who came after them. Some of them are cautionary poems and telling them, when you make it, if you land, don't mess up. A lot of people at home are waiting for you to become successful, so don't waste your time, don't gamble away your money, etc. And then one person would write a poem, another poet would come and respond to that poem. So it was this whole community of kindred people that were in isolation, despair, and in some cases humiliation, because many of these poems were written by the people who were going to be deported or those who were held there for a long time because they were waiting for appeals. So, this is quite remarkable site of memory and site of resistance. And I put my neck out there and say you could hold it up as important, almost as important as the slave narratives. That's what they are to us. Or the landing of the Pilgrims on Plymouth Rock. This is our landing on the Angel Island, our Plymouth Rock. And then finally, if you read the Ellis Island poems, the Victoria poems, or the Angel Island poems, if I don't tell you where they were written, you will never know, because the responses and the experiences in all three of the places were basically one and the same, because Canada imitated whatever the U.S. did in terms of they enacted their exclusion law after we enacted our exclusion law. Even to this day, they kind of follow suit after the U.S. And then, of course, with the immigration thing that just, that came through, the reform, these questions are coming up again. So I think that's the importance of history, is not to study something about the past and it's over with, so we don't have to think about it. Is really, history should be a cautionary tale for humanity, because reading it, we should learn something, we should become wiser and not make the same terrible mistakes to each other as human beings. Okay, so now we will read the first one. Ellen will read first.
This is a poem with 7 characters in each line. So there is some kind of an internal rhythm. So it goes da 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 da, a little short pause, almost imperceptible, and then da da da. 本宜舊歲來美洲，養父逼咗到初秋，織女會牛郎嗰日，乃踏林肯總統州。餐風上岸22日，行得平安抵美洲。以為數日可上浮，點知苦困木流愁。翻勞苛待真難受，感觸家境淚相流，但願早登三藩市，免在此間倍添愁。
Originally, I had intended to come to America last year. Lack of money delayed me until early autumn. It was on the day that the Weaver Maiden met the cowherd that I took passage on the President Lincoln. I ate wind and tasted waves for more than 20 days. Fortunately, I arrived safely on the American continent. I thought I could land in a few days. How was I to know I would become a prisoner suffering in the wooden building? The barbarian's abuse is really difficult to take. When my family circumstances stir my emotions, a double stream of tears flow. I only wish I could land in San Francisco soon, thus sparing me this additional sorrow here.
The next one is also a 7-character poem. 宿霧花期幾悠哉，即時籌款動情來。風波月月已歷盡，監牢居所受災磨。仰望屋鄰相咫尺，願回祖國負耕鋤。滿腹牢騷難尋味，聊書數據表心災。
I used to admire the land of the flowery flag as a country of abundance. I immediately raised money and started my journey. Over a month, I have experienced enough winds and waves. Now, on an extended sojourn in jail, I am subject to the ordeals of prison life. I look up and see Oakland so close by. I wish I could go back to my motherland to carry the farmer's hoe. Discontent fills my belly, and it is difficult for me to sleep. I just write these few lines to express what is on my mind.
跟住呢首詩又係7言，有個主題嘅，叫做深夜牛感，台山姓余嘅先生寫嘅。夜靜微聞風笑聲，形影相情見景榮。雲霧潺潺夜暗天，松聲唧唧月微明。悲苦相連天相顯，囚人獨坐倚窗邊。
Random thoughts deep at night. In the quiet of night, I heard faintly the whistling of wind. The forms and shadows saddened me. Upon seeing the landscape, I composed a poem. The floating clouds, the fog, darken the sky. The moon shines faintly as the insects chirp. Grief and bitterness entwined are heaven sent. The sad person sits alone, leaning by a window. Written by Yi of Toisan.
呢個係五言詩嚟㗎。The following is a 5-character poem。無限滄桑感，機身似流中，青山飛不去，綠水阻英雄。率已投不去，徒勞返無功。慎言承在我，無語怨東風。
I have infinite feelings that the ocean has changed into a mulberry grove. My body is detained in this building. I cannot fly from this grassy hill, and green waters block the hero. Impetuously, I threw away my writing brush. My efforts have all been in vain. It is up to me to answer carefully. I have no words to murmur against the east wind. By Yeung.
呢句好似係個對聯咁樣嘅，只得2句啫，又係7言。未過黃河心不息，過了黃河雙淚流。
Having not yet crossed the Yellow River, my heart is not at peace. After crossing the Yellow River, a double stream of tears flow.
呢首詩係從愛麗絲島嚟㗎，加拿大嗰度。思念故鄉眼淚流，不知何日可無憂。父母白宿妻兒散，樓房屋宇變成溝。命大如天花期到，以為安寧可無愁。誰知移民將我捕，不由分說人拘留。何能解決呵條例？待其勝利可自由，亦望同群齊合力，捐書回國殺我仇。得見父母妻兒會，笑口吟吟講西遊。
Ellis Island poem, translated by Charles Egan. Thinking of home, my tears begin to flow. I wonder, when can I ever be free of worry? Parents, uncles, wives, and children scattered. Our houses and rooms completely leveled. Luckily, I landed in the flowery flag, thinking I would be safe and free of sadness. Knew that I'd be seized by immigration officials. They threw me in detention, ignoring my protests. How can I gain relief from these oppressive laws? I await the time of our victory, for then we can be free. I hope compatriots will join together, pool their strength, donate funds, and return home to kill our enemies. Then, when I'm reunited with my parents, wife, and children, with laughter, I'll describe my journey to the West.